Welcome to episode number 3 of the rust bucket restoration of this 1966 Volkswagen Karmann Ghia. For those of you who are subscribed, thank you very much. This channel is growing so fast. For those of you who haven't subscribed, please consider subscribing, liking this. Today we're going to epoxy primer this car. We're going to paint it. So if you haven't seen the last 2 episodes, click here to see the last episode. So as you guys know, we can't touch this car because the oil's in our hand. We want this epoxy primer to be super clean and ready for paint. So let's talk about epoxy primer, what we got to do, how we got to mix it, and get ready for it. All right, so before we begin painting, we got to talk about what the painting is we're actually doing. We're putting on epoxy primer. Now, epoxy primer is just a paint that seals bare metal. That's its job. That's what it's for. So you have a bare metal car, you paint it with epoxy primer. On top of that, you put your body filler. On top of that, you put your high build primer. That's the one that you sand. On top of that, you put sealer, which is actually just a reduced epoxy primer. Then you put your paint coat. Then you put your clear coat. That's how it goes. So, epoxy primer. It's always mixed 1-to-1 ratio. I've never seen it mixed any other way. This is what I use, which is SPI epoxy primer. They're not paying me. I wish they were because this stuff's expensive. It's about, for the epoxy primer and the activator, this is I think like 200 bucks. So how do you mix it? Well, you got to find your TDS sheet. So when you buy paint, it comes with an information sheet. TDS just stands for technical data sheet. Just tells you how long you got to mix it for, at what ratio, how long you got to let it sit, and how long it has to sit between coats. So you're going to get that whenever you buy paint. If they don't give it to you, ask for it, Google it. That's important because you got to know how long you have between coats, how long you have to mix it and then wait, all that stuff. So always ask for or look for your TDS sheet. Okay, so we got that down. Now how do we mix paint? Okay, well, you get your little mixing cups. You buy these at the paint store, wherever you buy your paint from, and there are ratios on it. So if you look at the top, there are different ratios, and we need a 1-to-1 ratio. So here it is, 1-to-1. So say I want a lot of paint, I'm going to fill it up to this number 4 right here. Now I need 50% of activator as well, so I'll just match that 4 with this 4. So that 4 has paint, this 4 I fill up with activator. That's how it works. Pretty simple. And they're all a bunch of different ratios for a bunch of different paints. All right, so that's how that works. But you don't just pour the paint in. You got to put it through a filter. It looks like a coffee filter. The paint stores give you these for free. Make sure you get these along with stir sticks. Those 2 things are always free. You need them. Mix up your paint really well, and then you can start shooting. So let's talk about paint guns. Look, you're going to get a lot of people commenting on what kind of paint gun they use, what's best, what's better, what's good. It doesn't matter. Look, whatever you can afford, buy it. If you can't afford it, save up for it, because the better the gun you get, the better your paint job's going to come out. However, that's not to say you can't get a quality paint job with like a Harbor Freight gun or something like that. I use a DeVille Bis. Some people use SATA. Some people use Iwata. It's up to you. I mean, just find a paint gun that you can afford, get used to it, and I'm sure your paint job will come out good. For epoxy primer, because it's a base layer, I use this cheap 3M along with their PPS system. It works for me. That's what I like. My paint jobs come out great. All right, so before I mix up the epoxy primer, we got to remember the TDS, the technical data sheet, said it's a 50-50 mix. So 1 part epoxy, 1 part activator. And before we do that, I'm going to stir it up real good. When I bought it from the store, I had them stir it up real good. And you got to make sure it's all stirred up. Now before I even open it though, I got to wear a safety mask. You guys got to be careful. The VOCs, the volatile organic compounds, are going to get into your lungs, give you cancer, kill you. That's not good for anybody. Be safe. Okay, so here I'm adjusting my fan pattern. So there are 2 knobs on the paint gun. One's a fan knob and one's an air control knob. So the fan knob controls how tall that paint is. So you can make it smaller like a dot or you make it wide. And the bottom one is the volume control, basically how much paint comes out. So I don't want the paint to run, so I want to make sure it's just dialed in correctly. And that's what I'm doing. Okay, so I'm starting to paint the car with the interior first. I'm going to do under the dash and do the dashboard. Why? Because I don't want to do the rocker sills or the door sills, because then I'm going to be stepping over fresh paint and I may contaminate it. So I'm doing these hard to reach places first. Now remember, I'm doing a 50% overlap. You need to do this layer as if it's like your color layer. Why? Because it gets you into good practice and it makes you learn your gun, how fast you should go, how slow you should go, what your fan pattern should be, all these things. So get in the habit of pretending like this is your actual color layer. Even if you mess up here, don't worry, you still got 1 more layer to do. You can sand this. Don't worry, you got time. So it's good to learn everything right now while you're at this point, because you don't want to learn when you're doing your color layer, because that's going to be an expensive lesson for you. You want to have 50% overlap. Take your time, learn your gun. As you can see on the other end, I didn't have good coverage, but it's okay. I'm going to have another layer. Here, I'm doing good coverage. I'm taking my time, and this is what you should do. Get into the practice of it, learn your gun, and your paint job's going to come out great. So here's the finished product of the Karmann Ghia after one coat of epoxy primer. Now I may have missed some points, had a little bit of tiger striping because I wasn't in good position, but this is the time to learn all this stuff. This is the time to get into good practice so you don't make these mistakes with your color layer, because that's going to be a very expensive mistake. So don't worry if you make mistakes. You got another layer coming. You guys will get it. So I just finished shooting a single coat of epoxy primer on the Karmann Ghia, as you can see, but the day is over, so I'll come back and I'll do a second layer tomorrow. The good thing about this epoxy is I have 7 days to shoot an additional layer or do body filler or even do high build primer. So what I'm going to do is tomorrow I'll shoot another layer of epoxy primer. I'll let that sit for 2 days. After that, I'm going to put on some body filler. Get it roughly into the shape where I want it. After that, I'll put on the high build primer. Why? Because then I don't have to sand it down. If you wait more than 7 days, then you have to sand the whole car down again. So it'll have that tooth in it, so the new paint or the body filler will grab onto it. So I want to avoid that at all costs. So I'm going to do the second layer tomorrow. It'll fill in all those places where I may have missed, and then I'll wait 2 days for it to dry. I'll do the body filler, get that roughly into shape in 1 day, and right after that I'll shoot the high build primer, and then we're on our way. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode on putting on epoxy primer. Please subscribe and like, and let me know what else you guys want to see. I got 2 other car projects coming after this one, so stay tuned.